So, hi, Rob. Hi, everybody who's here with us today. Uh, Before I give you the word, I'm going to say hi to Pam, who's here with us, Jean, who's already, Eddie from Colombia. We already have 16 people joining us. So, oh yeah, I don't know where you're from. So, people who are watching, if you can tell us where you're joining us from, really cool. We're going to have some questions here also that you can answer. And um, well, let's welcome Rob. How are you today?
I'm wonderful today. It's a beautiful day here in New Mexico, where I live, and boy, I just filled with gratitude and joy for the blessings that my life is filled with. And some of those blessings, of course, are you and those people that are joining us now that do Psych-K around the world. It's such a gift to me to be able to know that this work is making a difference in the world. I don't teach much and I don't travel much anymore. I did a lot of that for many years earlier on, especially with Bruce Lipton when we taught 4-day events. And now the beauty is that it's as if there's just a whole lot of emissaries, out there, people that are using the work and making a difference in the world. And it brings me great joy to get to hear that that's what's happening.
Well, thank you, Rob, for taking time out of your beautiful family time that you have with Race and sharing. It's amazing that we get to share with you through technology, which is something we were not able to do before. And I think this is the fourth time that we have you this year. And it's on a pretty interesting month because we've been honoring the Psych-K principles every month. And this month we have interconnectedness. And that's what we would like to talk with you about, and that you can share with us what this principle means, why is it important, and what's the Psych-K view, and, well, obviously your view about this.
Well, I've been thinking about this because I knew we were going to talk about it for a while, and I realized, had an insight that when I thought about all 11 principles of nature, which really are the essence of how nature does what she does so magically and keeps this very complex planet operational, and I thought about all the principles, and I thought about, especially about us humans. There are millions and millions of species living on the planet. We sort of forget that because most of us don't see very many of them. Occasionally you'll see an animal or you'll see an insect or something, but there are whole civilizations, if you will, of beings that live in the earth and fly in the sky and live in the ocean, and we don't see them every day, so sort of easy to forget that they exist, but they do, and it's an amazingly complex system that only an intelligent consciousness could possibly manage to maintain and sustain such a group of interesting beings. And I think of them all as beings because they're all divine beings. In one form or another, we all come from the same source. So in my world, anyway. So when I thought about interconnectedness, I realized that the aha was that's probably singularly the most important of the 11 principles affecting human beings. And I say that because one of the things I've noticed over the years, in many years I was a psychotherapist and I saw people privately in private session work, and then just reading the news anytime these days, and for so many years, it seems that one of the things that's happened over the course of the last 30 years, which is how long Psych-K has been in existence. I've been in existence quite a bit longer than that, by the way, but it's the last 30 years for the work, is that I think we've grown increasingly apart, that technology right now is connecting us, and that's one of its great attributes. And on one level, it does connect us. On another level, it separates us. It actually makes us think that people are images on screens and not the actual genuine article, a human being you can hug, a human being that you can feel, touch, smell, they're there, voice inflections, the tactile part of relationships. And this technology can't do that. It gives us the second best thing. So yeah. While we've been connected here, I think in general, if you look at how technology is typically used, especially among the people that are maybe 20 to 30 years old, and then you have another generation that's very enamored with it, especially in the workforce, that's older than that, course. But to me, the interconnectedness issue cuts to the chase of a deeper issue, which is, I think most people have this sense of a disconnect from other people, that I'm not a part of you, you're not a part of me, and we're not a part of the divine mind that created all of that, all that is. And I think that accounts for that belief that we're separate, accounts for a whole lot of things that none of us like in the world, a lot of violence and a lot of harming of other people, whether it's in a personal relationship one-to-one, or countries one-to-one, or countries one-to-many. That the idea that we're different and therefore we're better somehow than another group of people, or more entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as we like to say in the United States. I'm not sure if that's terribly true anymore, but I do think that is an ideal. We should all be entitled to that. There's a basic human rights here we're talking about. So with interconnectedness, it seems to me what came to mind was asking myself the question, what would happen if, say, tomorrow we all woke up and we had this mindset, this set of beliefs that would allow us to feel what it was like to be another person? So if we could really feel that in our own bodies, in our own emotional sense, what a different world it would be almost immediately, and how we would choose to behave with another person. Because if we could feel their feelings, their response to us, something that we did or something we didn't do, something we said or didn't say, I think we would be a whole lot more aware, mindful, as the saying goes these days, is so popular from Buddhism. If we're mindful of how we impact other people, that should impact, and I think profoundly would impact, how we behave every day, all the way from the individual level to the nations that are so separate, or at least they appear to be separate. It really turns out, human beings really aren't all that different when it comes right down to it. I can say this from my own experience, that we have more in common. The basics for basic civilization itself, humankind, they have pretty much the same fears, desires, hopes, dreams as any other culture, from culture to culture. We express it differently, and our languages can be different. Our cultural training and our perception of things can be different, but I think there are some universal connectors, and those are some of them that I'm mentioning right now. So as far as interconnectedness goes, I think it's really, really an important piece of information and understanding. And then, of course, with Psych-K, we can create statements, put it into action. We can first-person present tense it, so to speak, and download that wisdom to our own subconscious minds, where living like that, thinking like that, becomes a habit. I have a quote I'd like to read that sort of sums this up from one of my favorite philosophers. I understand he was a pretty good mathematician and a physicist. His name is Albert Einstein. So I want to read this to get all the words right. But it's one of these beautiful statements. He doesn't mention interconnectedness per se, but if this isn't the definition of it, I don't know what is. So if you'll indulge me for a moment, I'll read this to you.
Of course, please do.
Einstein says, a human being is part of the whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. I love that phrase, optical delusion. So your eyes are deluding you when you see another person and think they're separate from you. And at the quantum physics level, it's clear that we aren't separate. Quantum entanglement has shown that, so the physicists know it. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Nobody's able to achieve this completely, but the striving for such achievement is in itself a part of the liberation and a foundation for inner security. So I think that Einstein did a good job of summing it up. As long as we believe the illusion that we are separate, because our eyes and our way of sensing the world, seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, and smelling, our five senses, they're very helpful in 3D and three-dimensional reality, in other words, but they're not the whole story. And so what we see is limited only to a fairly narrow bandwidth of light waves. What we feel, same thing. Our tactile ability is not nearly as good as some other creatures on the planet. Our hearing, our smell, our taste, all of that we're sort of trapped in some limitations of perception. But if we realize that that's the case, then we can transcend those. Then we can behave in a very different way, so that I may see you on this screen as separate from me, and you're far, far away, in this case in Miami, not so far away as you would be in Colombia. But the idea is you're not here, and therefore we're somehow separate. Well, in a manner of speaking, we are separate. Physically, we're separate. Energetically, that's different. Energetically, we're not separate. Psychically, we're not separate. Energetically, we're not separate. There's no real empty space in the universe, the physicists will tell us now, that we only perceive it that way. So that's why I think this is so important, a concept, an idea that if we imagine we're not so separate and we start behaving like that, so many parts of our world would be different. Education would be different. Politics would be different. Healthcare would be different. Relationships with people from different cultures would be different. It's amazing to think about, what if we really believed that we were connected and we're all part of each other and part of something greater than all of us? So I think that's why it's so important that people understand the notion of being connected in this way energetically.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and at the same time, it is a challenge. You know, when we've been taught this, that you're there and I'm here, and we're so different, and we create all these judgments around our differences, and we've created all these tags that we put to skin color or religion or just differences in thought. And I heard a quote a few days ago, and I would like your opinion on this. It read something like, every opinion that you express, it turns out to be that you express about somebody else or something else, it turns out to be a confession. And I think it's really interesting. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think there's some truth to that, for sure. I think a lot of our projections are projections, of course, coming from our own reality, therefore our own belief systems and our own ideas of the world. So, it's not always true. It's like any wise saying. Maybe has an essence that is true, and therefore it deserves thought. And then there will be exceptions to those rules. But I think those ideas about, I am telling you about me when I'm telling you about you, or I'm making a judgment. This happens, I think, particularly with children and parents, that the parents oftentimes, what they dislike most about their children and get most angry about is when the kid is showing you yourself. The parts you don't like about yourself, and you want them to not be like that, so you just hammer away at that. And those are the most egregious offenses of a child, are when they mirror back to you the part about you that you don't like. So I think that's true not just of little kids, but little kids in big bodies that we call them grown-ups. But many of them are only grown up physically. Emotionally, not so much. And in a safe place, they're honest with themselves. They're like little kids in big bodies running around with a bunch of limiting beliefs that, if those beliefs were changed and matured through balancing, would be a really good way to do that, because you can change beliefs, subconscious beliefs, so quickly. Then you could grow up your emotional makeup to match your physical chronological age, so to speak, and you really would be a grown-up. So I think it's important to realize that that what you see, and become really aware of, what I see is what I see. It's what I can perceive based on my set of perceptual filters. The kind of glasses I wear are filled with, you could say, all your belief systems are inside your glasses. And so what you see out there is only what your mind can perceive through the filters that you have. Doesn't mean it's all of reality, but that's a big mistake people make. They think that what they see and how they feel about things is reality, whereas really what it is a set of perceptions about some objective reality, if there's such a thing. We can come to grips with certain things and agree on certain things, but when it comes down to things like feelings and emotions and values and so on, we tend to have very different ideas sometimes because we have very different backgrounds and therefore very different filters through which we see what we call reality.
Yeah. And that's, I think that's part of the interesting. Are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I think it went away a little bit.
Oh, sorry.
Many times in our workshops, when we're talking about this interconnection and how actually somebody who's making me angry is probably expanding or being like an amplifier or something that I carry inside. And we talk about, yeah, that's because you have beliefs or perceptions that are making you angry about that. People say, no, but that's a fact. It happens over and over again. It's a fact. It's not a belief. It's not a perception. What would you say to somebody who says that? That's a fact. I see it happen all the time.
Right. I think it is a fact from that point of view. In other words, it does happen over and over. It's not an objective, it's not a subjective measure they think of that. The proof is, yeah, this happened repeatedly. The question isn't, is that a fact or not a fact? The question is, why does that keep happening?
Right.
And the fact about that is you're participating in that. You're calling it in. And until you deal with the issues that send out a vibration, literally a thought, that other people pick up, and then they bring to you whatever that thought is. I heard I remember a quote was kind of fun years ago. I read it somewhere. The thoughts are like boomerangs. They return with amazing accuracy. So you have a thought about somebody or something or some situation, a set of beliefs, in other words, and so-called reality will accommodate you. It will bring to you those things that confirm the belief. Typically, you won't see other examples because you can't. You turn them into whatever it is that fits into your preconceived dogma, your preconceived notion of what's going on, and then you use the fact that you see these repetitive things as an example of why you're stuck and it's not your fault. Hey, it just happens. I'm not trying to make this happen. Well, consciously, perhaps not. In fact,
Right.
usually not.
Usually
But
not.
if you keep seeing a repeated pattern in your life, then I think you need to look in the mirror before you look out into the world and see, there's another example of that. There's another person who behaves like that, treats me that way. What about you do you believe that allows that to be true? That's the question to ask.
Yeah. And do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It's delayed a little bit, so that's why I keep asking.
Okay.
In last weekend, I was in St. Augustine with Robin Graham, and we were there for the advanced workshop, and she did an introduction that I thought was really interesting about Psych-K, and because we do have some facilitators that are joining us and some people who have not been through Psych-K. And she was sharing with us how we started 30 years ago when we started sharing this information, and it was when people were talking about beliefs, when you were talking about beliefs, and not many other people were talking about that, and people would be coming into Psych-K
Right.
through the idea of self-help, and how we've moved forward with that, and we're more now in the self-realization and these principles of nature and interconnectedness as a path to true spirituality. So can you share with us a little bit about that story and how it's come to be where we are now?
Yeah. Well, where we started, so to speak, or at least when I started to be the conduit for this information 30 years ago, 1988, it was a different time. Affirmations were very popular in the 60s and 70s and then 80s. There was a growing movement of self-help where people wanted to deal with their psychological issues mostly. And there wasn't a whole lot of talk about spirituality, but there was a lot of talk about the psychology and sort of alternatives to mainstream insight-based talk therapy, which helps you to get context for your life and helps you understand maybe how you became how you are, kind of experiences you had, the conclusions you drew, the belief systems that followed that, and then the behaviors that are driven from those belief systems. But over time, it had happened in my world anyway, that there was always something missing in psychology for me. I was almost a psychology major. I started out that way in college. And just a little aside, it's a personal aside, I was taking the psychology classes, thought that's what I wanted to do. And one of the instructors, I asked questions. I was just very inquisitive in these classes. And one of the instructors called me up after class and said, Rob, you ask very interesting questions, but they really aren't appropriate for psychology classes. Maybe you ought to go talk to the people in the philosophy department. They ask the why are we here questions, not what do you do after you get here and how long will a rat run a maze to get the cheese once you take the cheese away and the reward system is gone. And they were measuring behavioral things. But the questions that haunted me, in a good way, those days was, why are we here? What is this for? What are we supposed to do? And where are we going? The questions
Right.
that most philosophers have asked themselves for eons. So I switched majors. I became a philosopher. Asked the same questions, and they were seeking those answers. And they were less quantifiable by a long shot. I mean, you could measure how many runs a mouse would make in a maze for cheese, and then when you would extinguish that behavior and that kind of thing. But I wasn't interested in that. That was just rat psychology to me, and it was very uninteresting. I wanted to know why the rat existed and not something else. So that's kind of where that mentality of there's got to be more to this, and the answers I was getting at the university were not satisfying answers for me. And even in philosophy, when I got out of UCLA, and that's the University of California at Los Angeles, where I went to college for the last year and a half anyway in my undergraduate training, I had way more questions than I had answers, and I had gone in to get answers. I thought, well, these are the ivory tower people. These people think about this all the time. There are people that teach this. They must have read a lot. They must know a lot more than me. And in a way they did, but they didn't have the answers. They knew a lot about why there weren't any answers or why the questions were valuable, and you sort of had to figure this out for yourself along the way in life. You could read some very brilliant people that had thought about these matters much more deeply and more broadly for a longer time than I had. So I gained a lot from reading of the great master philosophers. But even there was something missing, and that turned out to be spirituality. The concept of beyond the thought process, there's an inner knowing. There's a force, and literally like in Star Wars, it is the force that is the substance of the universe and accounts for everything that it is. So I finally came to that conclusion. Then I realized when you ask questions or you seek solutions to problems, again, Einstein was right. He said, you can't solve a problem from the same level of the thinking that created the problem. So to me, psychology sees the problems. Philosophy is much more likely to see answers because it's a notch above the psychological questions. That's why I shifted majors. Being a major in psychology initially. And so that's really where we are. It's my journey mostly getting to the point where I was waiting and waiting and waiting for the times to change enough where we could start talking about spirituality and spiritual issues as a foundation for our very beingness. And that's what connectedness. So get back to interconnectedness. The thing that connects us the most is this unarguable fact that we're all these beautiful beings of light that came from the same source. There aren't multiple sources of, you came from someplace like it. Place maybe, but not source. So if we are all attached at the source, and that's what we have in common, the sooner we can re-identify with that source, the sooner we'll all come home to the same parent, so to speak. So to me, that's why Psych-K, especially at this time in the evolutionary history of this globe and the galaxy for that matter, there's a huge, massive shift going on. Almost nobody denies that now. Some people only see it, in their own lives, and things are tough and politics are weird and financial situation in the world is very unstable. All these things, little things that give one comfort, thinking that you can predict what's going to happen tomorrow or in the next hour, are sort of being torn away to where, what is your security? Einstein talked about it. It was the connectedness. The sense of security comes knowing you're part of something greater than just yourself. And it turns out if you call on that greaterness, that consciousness, and know that you're a part of it, then there's always an answer to whatever the problem is. And it's much easier to be creative in your answers from above the vision of the problem. The problem is at the, say, political level. Yeah, you have to get involved with politics. You got to do what you have to do, voice your opinion. But the real change isn't going to happen in politics until the consciousness of the people change. And I think politics is not a top-down situation. I think it's a bottom-up situation. That is to say, the mass of us change our view of what we want, and we take back control of our lives and our minds, stop wanting what we're told to want, and want what is necessary to reach this state of consciousness that is truly divine. Understand, as Chardin said, Pierre de Chardin, we are spiritual beings, first and foremost, having a physical experience, having a human experience. So if we get it right, ordered right, and we're remembering our spiritual and divine right and essence and true origin, then we can operate through physicality in a much more interconnected way.
Beautiful. I guess that ties also to what we heard Bruce Lipton talk about this when we were together in Taos in July, and how the next step in evolution for humanity is not if we're going to become X-Men or if we're going to have more psychic powers. It's this true awareness that we are all interconnected and that this is only one organism, instead of thinking that I'm better than the other one because I am so-called spiritual, or I'm better than you because I have a different color of skin or a different religion. This being able to work in harmony as our own organism does, because we can feel that, we can see what happens inside the skin. We're not aware of that all the time, but how with Psych-K we can really get to that awareness of being all cells of this 7.5 trillion or whatever billion human cells that we are in this organism.
Oh, just cells. Yeah, sorry. I was thinking about how many people are on the planet, about 7.5 billion.
Yeah, as cells of the human.
Yeah,
as cells of the human organism, as one organism. How can we reach that with Psych-K?
Well, it all comes down to perception again. If we can change perception, that's what is at the core of Psych-K. So do your balances. Create the I am connected to divine intelligence. I am an integral part of the whole. I mean, and probably an infinite number of ways you can express the idea. But for individuals, find out where, when you say those words out loud and it feels like, well, not really, not quite that, that's where you want to go. And consciously, people have read oftentimes that people who are really seeking to wake up from this illusion have gotten stuck in some ways, and they need to elevate their perceptual capabilities so that they can see, feel, touch, smell, the sense of being this spiritual being. So whatever you can read, whatever you can understand from, say, a conversation like this, if there's a little piece of it somewhere that says, oh, bingo, the light bulb just went on. Take that, write it down, and be sure you internalize it, because there's so many masterful minds that have thought about all of this for eons. And go to the ones that you're drawn to, and then excerpt the wisdom. Literally download the wisdom of the masters. It's not necessary, because Psych-K is here and because this is what it's for, is to speed up your own evolution by going to books that give you insight. The insight is the part Psych-K doesn't necessarily give you. It may afford you an opportunity, say in the whole brain state, to receive more information and have more ahas, more epiphanies, more understanding, deep understanding. But when you just have the understanding, don't stop there. The thing about that is you want to share that with your subconscious mind so that wisdom becomes a habit and not an effort. You don't want your life to be a day-to-day struggle. You want it to be kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy based on the wisdom, ancient wisdom, contemporary wisdom, your own wisdom from your own life, and be the best you can be, because it's an ever-evolving process. It doesn't say, oh, now I've arrived. achieved enlightenment and I'm going to hang out in enlightenment land. No, there's a next step to that. So it's a process, but it's a beautiful process. The thing is, there are steps along the way, and with each step, there's a revelation, there's an awakening, there's peace, there's a sense of value and self-worth that comes from realizing you're a part of something greater than you think you are. Bruce too. I mean, I used to work with Bruce for 14 years. We were all over the globe teaching these 4-day workshops. He'd do 2 days of the science, the biology of belief, and I would do 2 days of Psych-K in those days. It's a 3-day course now, and that's a good thing because we always ran out of time. So anyway, the thing with Bruce is, and he just told me this privately when I picked him up at the airport this last time when we worked here in Taos to do this 4-day event. And he said, well, it has been up till now, it's been about the individual really cultivating themselves and becoming all they could be that way. So self-help, helping oneself, has been the way it has been up till now. And then he said, but the future is all about, not about helping self, it's about being of service to the many, to the group, and it's all about community. So it's how do you fit in community? So the kind of work we would do with Psych-K now would be a lot about relationships and community and collaboration, another principle of nature, of course. How do you collaborate with people effectively and get the competition element out of it and get the teamwork element into it, and then be able to live vicariously through anybody's success. So if it's a success of one, it's a success of the whole. And start thinking about the whole and not just about the individual parts, because again, that tends to separate us. If I feel a part of something, then I contribute to the group. And he pointed out to me several years ago, and we've used this concept since then, and that is that there's a medieval definition of the idea of competition that's very different than the modern version of it these days. Competition these days, I think everybody would agree, there's a winner and a loser. And that's the whole point. You compete with each other, somebody wins, somebody loses. But in medieval times, the definition of competition was to strive as a group toward a common goal. So the individuals in the group were all striving for a common goal. The competition was to see who could give the most to get the group to the goal, not who could win so everybody else loses. Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds suspiciously like what we call collaboration. Today, collaborating is working together for a common goal. It used to be the competition actually meant, the root words that comes from, actually meant the same thing. And we've turned it into something that separates us instead of something that connects us. That's where this whole idea of interconnectedness is, Marta, and it's why it's so important for us to be mindful of, am I collaborating here? Am I recognizing my interconnectedness with everybody else? Because it raises your compassion level, your tolerance level, your appreciation level, your gratitude for other people being in your life, even when they're people that are hard to be around. You know, look at that situation and say, all right, is there a message for me here? Is this my stuff? Because if it is, thank you very much, and then you go do your work. If it's not, it's just as valuable. No, actually, that's not my stuff. That's your stuff, and you're projecting it toward me. But if you can get honest with yourself and perceptive enough, still enough, to say, is there any truth in that behavior that upsets me that's actually in me that would draw it to me? And so discernment at that level of consciousness is really key. That's an art form. When you get to the place where you don't get emotionally buttons pushed immediately and you go into defensiveness, you say, well, that's an interesting thing. I wonder why they would say that. Is it my stuff or is it their stuff? Maybe it's both. But I think I've noticed that various times when I've done that, and of course I had an advantage because I was a psychotherapist for 14 years, so I had a lot of times when people would come in and bring me their stuff, and it was really my stuff. So that's when I realized that I was in an ideal job. I was getting paid for people to bring me my stuff so I could recognize it and change it. Pretty good job, if you ask me. So awareness, full time. I wasn't just going to get it to be a hobby. It was my profession. So you can do that very easily when you start to think this way. Start to think, okay, if we're all interconnected, this just happened. I got upset. What was the upsetness about? Was it something in me, a button that got pushed, or do I just find the behavior disgusting? Because sometimes that's all it
Right.
is. It's just really bad behavior on the part of another person, and you're reminded that such behavior can actually happen in the world, and aren't you glad that you're not that person having that experience, Then you can have compassion for them, and if you know Psych-K, you can probably even do something to help them if they're open to it. So it's just about you staying with your feet on the ground and your head in the clouds. That's my favorite saying for how we should be in the world. You want the mystic. I'm a practical mystic. That's how I say, what's your religion, Rob? I'm a practical mystic. So feet are on the ground in three-dimensional world, heads in the clouds, because I can see a lot more from up there than I can where my feet are. So it's flying above the problems and seeing what the problems are and then dealing with them in a very grounded way in three-dimensional reality. Psych-K is very good for both, actually.
Right. And we have some questions here. If there's something that we can do with Psych-K at a group level, because I understood that this is something we do individually. Can you talk about that a little bit? How does this work when the connection between what I do and what happens, what we can do about groups and that collectiveness of the subconscious beliefs?
Yeah, sure. There are two things that come to mind immediately. One is surrogation. If you know the art of surrogation from the advanced Psych-K class, or now we also teach that in the master facilitation course, so that people have a way to make a connection to one or more people at the same time at a distance. So you don't have to be face to face with them. You don't have to have that personal connection that way. It's an energetic connection. And there are protocols for that must be utilized in order to make the authentic connection. So you could say you could do surrogation with an individual, and many facilitators know this, that you can do that, and that you can do long distance sessions with people. They don't have to live anywhere close to you, and it's just as effective as far as the energetics go. It's a little less easy to have an exchange back and forth, conversationally. Sometimes you can do that too, but so it's my second choice. The first choice is in person. Second choice would be surrogation. But you can do that with an individual. You can also do it with a collective consciousness of a group of people, or an ethnic group, or a group of people in a corporation, a collective consciousness of a company's group that makes up that company. You can do it for, actually it's cross species. You can do it for species of animal, all the dolphins, dolphin consciousness. You can do it for Gaia, Mother Earth, as a living organism. You can do it that way. So anyway, it's only really limited by your creativity and what your interest is and what your passion is. And the other way is brand new, and that's the Gaia project, as a matter of fact, that gives each individual an opportunity to make a huge contribution in a very simple, very straightforward way, anywhere they are on the planet, anytime they want to do it. And that program I'm very excited about because we've just launched it, and there are nearly 1,000 people now that are representing that use of Psych-K in the world. And I think there will be several thousand before this is over, to the place where portals, and this is, I'll give you a quick rundown on the Gaia project for the facilitators that haven't yet heard about it. It's a beautiful, beautiful concept of an individual being able to interact energetically by opening a portal of consciousness. It's like a vortex. I think of it as a huge energy cup that people can enter. And inside this cup is a rarefied, conditioned field of consciousness that allows other beings who recognize the Psych-K signal to enter that portal and do Psych-K work directed by their higher selves, not by the facilitator. The facilitator's job is to open the portal, sustain it, and then close it. And that takes concentration in the middle. You can't open it and then just go do something else. I mean, you can, but then the portal won't function. You've got to be there. It's just like when you're doing a new direction balance. In fact, it's kind of a very modified version of a new direction balance. You're in the whole brain posture. That keeps you focused. You're the space holder. You are, we call it the Sumatak consciousness. Sumatak is an Inuit word. Inuits are people that inhabit northern Canada, and people live very close to the earth. And this word, Sumatak, the best definition I've heard, the one that I love the most, there are multiple definitions, is the keeper of the sacred space in which wisdom is revealed. And I love that idea, the keeper of the sacred space in which wisdom is revealed. And to me, when I first heard that, probably 15 or more years ago, I thought, what a beautiful definition of a Psych-K facilitator. Remember, we're not people that do something to somebody else, or we're not people that change their beliefs. We can't do that. Psych-K will not permit it. It was never designed to be a do-to art form. You can't do that. It's
Right.
not the same kind of thing where I'm going to heal you. I put my hands on you, and you just wait for the healing. This is participatory, and the participant, the real active ingredient in all of this, is the individual that thinks they can't heal themselves. So Psych-K facilitator's job is to hold the space in such a sacred way that awareness comes up, bubbles up to the surface in that person. They realize they're more powerful than they ever imagined, and then they heal themselves, whatever the healing is. And I'm using that in a very generic term, not necessarily a
Right.
physical illness.
Right.
It can be
Mm-hmm.
that, but I'm just saying, I guess what I would say is healing to me is the more you come in alignment with your own divine essence, the more healed you are. Because it's the illusion, I call it the illusion of separation disorder, the idea that we think we're separate from everything and everyone, if we're kind of on our own. That's a huge misperception. And when you really get that that's true and your beliefs are lined up, you clear the signal to the divine between you and whatever you consider to be the divine creative force that accounts for our existence and the existence of everything, the omniverse, the multiple universes. So that's why I think it's so wonderful that just taking the basic Psych-K workshop qualifies you to be able to join this Gaia project, that's what I call it, to open as many portals as often as possible so as many beings, not just on the earth, by the way, but galactically speaking, who resonate to the frequency of Psych-K. It's past because it's actually quite ancient. It has an ancient version of it. There's a modern version of it. And in my world, there are future versions of it as well. We call them future because here we are at this point in time in our own evolution, and so we think in linear time about a past and a future. Actually, even the quantum physicists will tell you time is an illusion. Einstein said, yeah, it's a convenient way to think about things so everything doesn't happen all at once, but it's a convenience. It's a cognitive convenience. It's not a fact that time is relative. That's why it's a theory of relativity. So all of that to say that you want to get involved, then this is a way to do it. And you allow these portals to be open. It only takes maybe 10, maximum 15 minutes in my experience. And Ray's and I, my wife and I, have been doing this for several years. Slightly different format. This is the new simplified format. But it's the same concept. That you're allowing the many to be transforming themselves inside this rarefied field of consciousness. And then when it closes, other portals open. So we have now like roughly 1,000 people that are doing this. If you just think about any given day, these portals being opened where millions or billions of beings can enter these portals. They're not time-based. They're non-linear, non-time-based portals of consciousness with access to all of the Psych-Ks, past, present, and future, so that they're guided by your higher self, the individual's higher self, in conjunction with the subconscious mind. So the changes take place in this magical environment, but then they're downloaded to three-dimensional reality here where we are using it on this planet. So that's the exciting part to me. There's no impotence here. There's no, well, what am I going to do? I'm just one person. No, you're one person that can create a portal that millions or billions of beings can use to accelerate their own spiritual evolution. And the more of that happens, the more this planet and our neighbors in the galaxy are going to benefit from it. The sooner we have an elevated level of consciousness where wars and abuse and all the horrible things that we see we do to each other, really, and to ourselves, disappear. It can't live in this rarefied environment, and we become the environment. When we do that, all those things will be impossible to hold consciousness at that low level that we're doing it right now.
Beautiful. And it is quite exciting because we started this almost 10 days ago, and in these 10 days, like you said, we already have close to 1,000 people who are Psych-K facilitators and are doing this Gaia project and referring to us not only the experience they're having during the balances or during this experience of the Gaia, but also the benefit they're receiving for themselves, how everything is starting to accelerate. They're starting to be more aware of their own things that they need to transform, manifesting changes faster. So they are all very excited to see how this proposal of we are serving the global or the galactic evolution, and the evidence that we are actually serving ourselves as well.
Yeah, service is a big deal if you really think about it. My experience in the last 30 years with Psych-K is the more I've been of service, the more that service serves me. Yeah. So it was an afterthought. I didn't go in to say, okay, so I'm keeping score. I do 5 balances with people, and then I get the benefit, and it's, this kind of trade-off deal. That was never the energy. The energy was there was such joy in being able to be of service in some meaningful way to the planet, to my own environment, to, in this case, now we're talking about an extended version of that to the galaxy and other beings that inhabit the galaxy. But the main thing is that for me, over the years, service became a joy. It didn't feel like drudgery or work, or I'm sacrificing something, or I'm giving something up, or I'm becoming a martyr. Never any of that entered it in Psych-K. You can go down those paths, and you can sacrifice yourself and your life for others, and sometimes that's what people need to do. It's their karma or whatever. But in Psych-K, it's really not like that. Really, if your purpose and intention is clean and clear and pure, you want to do the service because it's a gift you enjoy giving, and you get as much pleasure giving it as you hope people get getting it. If you're real clean about that, then what I found was, boy, the joys and the blessings that accrue to you from that, starting with that feeling. It's not, well, this was really hard, now give me something back. It wasn't like that at all. I already received all back that I could possibly imagine in the act of giving, and more was given. So to me, there's no downside at all. If anybody wants to get involved with this project and be truly of service to one's fellow beings, ensouled conscious beings, that's what we're dealing with here, then giving them gifts, the work and the ability to accelerate their own evolution spiritually, self-realization rather than just self-help. Self-help is where you start. There's nothing wrong with it. But there is a graduation day where you go from, okay, I've done a lot of self-help. Now I feel like I'm really ready to do service more than to myself, but also to others. It's a sign of your evolution and the evolution of consciousness. So I certainly encourage people for whom this makes any sense that aren't already doing it to check with you at info@psych-k.com and find out how they can get involved with this global galactic process.
Beautiful. Well, Rob, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your time and your wisdom and your experience and your spiritual journey with us and this beautiful proposal that Psych-K has for so many people. And we hope to have you here again sometime soon.
Well, you will, because it's such a pleasure to be able to connect, at least in this way, with these wonderful beings of light that have taken this work, internalized it, and are using it in a way that makes every day on this planet a better day than the day before. So thank you deeply from the bottom of my heart, all of you who are doing Psych-K. You don't just take a course and then put it on the shelf. Use it, and you will make a difference in the world that you can't even imagine at this point.
Right. I can agree totally with that, because when I did this the first time 9 years ago, I could not have imagined the life that I'm living right now and what this was to mean in my life. So thank you for everything. Always my deep gratitude. And I know for those of people who have been watching, we've had almost 60 people watching us live today, and plus all the others that will be watching because of the time differences. So have a great night, and we'll see you here again soon.
Thank you, Marta, and thank you for all you do. Thank you. Thank all of you.